Good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to see you all at Global Korea Forum 2022. I am the moderator for this session. My name is Lee Hyun-hee. I teach at Gyeongsang National University. This session is about the status and direction of international development cooperation in intellectual property. So we are going to look at what kind of cooperation efforts we make in the area of intellectual property. We invited 3 experts who've been working in international development cooperation in the IP. And let me briefly introduce our presenters. First, we have Ms. Choi Kyo-suk from KIPO. She worked at APEC Intellectual Property Expert Group as well, and also she led APEC IPGE as a chair to talk about intellectual property initiative among the APEC member countries. Our second presenter is Park Yu-sun from Korea Invention Promotion Association. He talks about the ASEAN intellectual property, development cooperation, and he is an expert in this area. And third presenter is Mr. Choi Jae-sik, Korea Institute of Intellectual Property. He has the research efforts to strengthen the regional connectivity in terms of IP international development cooperation. Let me first invite our first speaker, Ms. Choi Kyo-suk from KIPO.
Please give her a big hand. Good afternoon. My name is Kyo-suk Choi from Korea Intellectual Property Office. Please bear with me. I am sorry. I couldn't click to the next page. It's an honor for me to present on the topic of intellectual development cooperation. I would like to thank KIIP for making this event possible. I would like to talk about the current status and key agenda for international development cooperation in IP area. So we are talking about IP, but at KIIP, we are covering overall patent right and also design. So that's why I have selected my topic as the international development cooperation for industrial IP. So this is the agenda. The current development cooperation and history of ODA at KIIP and goal for industrial IP and procedure will be talked about. I'd also talked about the industrial property right, and I would like to then shortly review the overall procedure, which is somewhat complex, and then talk about ODA goal and principle, and then describe the third International Development Cooperation Comprehensive Basic Plan, and then discuss about the overall direction and plan for 2022, because this plan is important for industrial property right cooperation direction. So under the overall international development cooperation, as an umbrella, we are carrying out all relevant programs under KIIP. So I'm going to go over the detailed programs that we have, and then talk about technology distribution cases and brand distribution cases. And we also have some newly planned items that I will be preparing for. And if time allows, I would like to invite feedback and your insight so that we can incorporate in our future program to reflect the voice of other stakeholders. Then first, I'd like to briefly introduce our International Development Cooperation for Industrial Property Rights. So we have largely three categories. First is the WIPO Trust Fund. Under UN, there is a WIPO as an international organization, and Korea contributes some contribution amount. So this is coming from the Korean government's ODA budget. So we provide awareness education for students and general public, and we also provide patent evaluation training for evaluators, and we also disseminate best practice cases for IPR&D and other brands for Korea, and we disseminate that to other countries. And this is under UN organization, but under UN there are many training programs. This already exists in other markets as well, but it's only translated into UN official languages. But we're also translating that to Korean language, and it's uploaded today. And we want to expand the scope of uploads that are in Korean. How we use this trust fund is, if you start from the bottom, I think it's all the more meaningful that the UN official languages are also translated into Korean as well. But there are people who do not speak Korean, of course, but if they were to go into WIPO website and see a Korean language document, I think Korea's awareness would go up in the global arena. And I believe that could create some synergy as Korea as a brand. And we're also disseminating best practice, which could be the case for RPR&D. In order to meet goal, RPR&D is analyzing patent. It's something that we have been doing, and we were the only entity that has been doing this. And we've done this as a pilot 2 years ago. The response has been great. Some may think this is for granted, but they were not doing it in overseas market. So for IPR&D, it's something that we can brand as our own, and once it's fully developed, we're going to disseminate this. We also carry out training for patent evaluation. So patent filing is done by country level, whether it's be brand or IP or property rights. So once you file for that in the specific country, you'll be able to sell under that brand. And when there is evaluation, of course, they refer to the first evaluation that was done in other country. Therefore, if they know about how Korean evaluators evaluate, it will be easy for other countries to really approve our filing is easily. And also, we will be able to enhance IP awareness in Korea, and there are many who are coming to Korea for IP filing as well. So we are seeing heightened awareness. Also, at KIIP, we are carrying out ways to solve community problems and to increase income. Using IP, we are providing optimal technology based on IP, and we create brand and help them create economic impact. And on the bottom part, it's a collaboration program. So one is between KIIP and Ministry of Science and Technology. So this is a more advanced technology, more complex technology to solve for difficult and challenging issues. So we're joined by research institutions abroad, and in order to do that, we provide IP or patent analysis. We're also working with agricultural promotion agencies. Basically, APA is focusing on solving food issues, but when there's technology development for seed and crop planting, what we can contribute is we can add value to commercialize some technology. So we attach optimal technology and brand to support agricultural sector. I would like to go into each and every area in a more depth in the following slides. Then let me just talk about history of ODA for Korean government and KIIP. In 1987, we established EDCF and we joined OECD DAC in 2010 to start ODA project. And as of April of this year, we are contributing 4.4 trillion won in 44 institutions covered by Office of Government Policy. And in 2004, we started offering WIPO Korea's Trust Fund. So KIIP and WIPO signed MOU to kickstart this. And in 2010, when Korea joined OECD DAC, we started to create ODA where we had the expertise. So we created where we had in-depth knowledge. And in 2021, we had the third comprehensive plan that was developed. At the time, there were some converged area research that was done between ministries. So we started a joint research with Ministry of Science and Technology, and we are also making foundation and securing budget to work with Agricultural Promotion Agency. So when you add all these up for industrial property rights, in 2022 it was 2.5 billion won, and in 2023 it's expected to reach 2.8 billion won. But this fund, although it's not all that huge, it does accelerate research effort and research result. Then, why is KIIP doing ODA? There's a role that was requested by the international community as a member of OECD DAC, and also there's a role that is envisioned by the International Development Corporation ministry or agency on KIIP. And Europe, China, Japan, Korea, and the US are the top 5 IP5 countries. So there is also a request coming from this IP5 members on the role of KIIP. One of the major drivers for economic development in Korea, I think, is coming from patent and IPs. Of course, there are other areas that contributed, but as you can see in the graph, look at the economic growth and the number of patents and IP. The growth is very well synchronized. It did go up dramatically, and as you know, Korea is the only country who grew up to be an advanced country. And using IP, many of the developing countries want to use IP to grow economy, and these countries also benchmark Korea to achieve economic growth. For developing countries, the US or European countries are too far-fetched and they have developed over a very long period of time. But whereas Korea grew rather quickly at a relatively short period of time without any natural resources. So IP introduction and IP development was rather fast. So as you can see, there are different factors that grow IPs. There are laws and regulations and organizations and private institutions. So it is very structurally well formed, and these were developed hand in hand because it was necessary for economic development. And once it was set up, it was further expanded to support further economic growth. And that's something that developing countries want to learn from Korea, and hence we're developing curriculum around that. And when you look at ODA procedure at KIIP, all of the programs are provided free of charge. N-2-year experts will go through the business feasibility study, and we submit the implementation plan for ODA to Ministry of Foreign Affairs to go through evaluation on feasibility. As you can see, there is also the International Development Cooperation Center or committee to evaluate whether it fits the overall business and program objective. And when needed, we go to MOS to do budget feasibility review and then carry out the project. And in N+1 and N+2 year, we will carry out post-evaluation. So starting from N+2, one project will conclude within N+2 years. And MOFA will look at the different connectivity of different projects as well as feasibility of different projects. And here what is important is whether or not the project meets the criteria for the recipient country. So let's go over the goal of ODA and principle of ODA. So this is something that you can check on the ODA website. Here where KIIP can contribute is the red boxed area. So we believe KIIP can contribute in sustainable development. We're not just delivering technology, but we're also providing training, continuous training. And I talked about optimal or right technology. So we don't deliver extremely high tech because it's not sustainable to use. So even if it's not the highest technology, we leverage local raw materials for them to leverage for local areas. To you, maybe it may look like rather less developed technology, but it could also, however, contribute to sustainable development in our view. So that's how we apply our goals and principles. We also mentioned that we have a packaged plan, or we have different programs that are linked. So the third plan starts from 2025, but the second plan was somewhere around 2015 and 2019. As you can see, quantitatively ODA size did grow, and from a qualitative standpoint, we were able to build our position as a middle donor country and paid foundation for comprehensive and integrated ODA implementation. As you can see, the budget has grown over time, as you can see on the slide. When the second plan was developed, we did face some limitation, which was two things that I mentioned on the slide. One is the ratio of ODA versus GNI. So that is, we did have little or less funding. And secondly, we had room for improvement for strategy development and planning, and also consequence management or performance management. And also it is important to build ecosystem. So based on these shortcomings, we developed the third basic plan for international cooperation. So we selected 5 P's for sustainable development: peace, people, prosperity, planet, and partnerships were the global value that we are seeking. And we wanted to create national interests that is win-win to both donor country and recipient country. And the goal also was to increase solidarity and cooperation between ODA entities. So as you can see, this is the third key initiatives that we focus on. Here you can see that there are different linkages. And based on this, in 2022, we were able to develop key initiatives for the third International Development Cooperation Plan. So most of it is squared, but based on the third plan, we have also selected programs and design programs to meet this vision. So here we have a lot of words saying linking or bundling different projects. So the government is requesting working across different ministries, and that has been the emphasis ever since. And at KIIP, when we select ODA, we have 4 criteria, which is we look at the feasibility, consistency, and efficiency. And when we make this evaluation, we look at whether it meets the criteria. We also look at whether it matches the policy of the recipient countries, and then make that evaluation. So I think these pages are self-explanatory, so I'm going to skip through them. We also look at the effectiveness, whether it could be done locally or implemented locally. So we actually look at whether the technology is applied and is actually used in the local areas. And we also look at whether it's sustainable or not. In order to do that, we look at whether they have the right infrastructure, what are some of the raw materials, and ingredients that they can leverage. So we check and then evaluate whether that could be used. Having said that, let me then go into in-depth about what KIIP is doing. So what are some of the ODA that we are doing? When we planned for this in 2010, we wanted to develop the right technology using intellectual property information. So we wanted to minimize investment and also maximize the use of this IP that could well be embedded into local environment. So typically that's what we would call the optimal technology. So just because a certain technology is high-tech or advanced, it may not always work. Even if you provide that technology, sometimes the technology will just sit there and be wasted. So it was more important that we have the right technology and appropriate technology for the local context. So not just giving the right technology, we also need to create or protect national interest for Korea. So the window of property right or IP right spans over 20 years. So some technology might have been expired in Korea or will be reaching the end of life cycle. So this kind of IPs could be provided to ODA countries free of charge. And and the IP owner could also develop sales route or opportunity for that local market. And once certain issue is solved, for instance, if sesame seed did not generate enough yield, you solve that as using technology and also provide branding for that. Because for these countries, there were no brand awareness or marketing activities whatsoever. So developing local and indigenous story to develop brand is something that we have done. When we do this, we'll be able to have these countries to create value. And that's how we are operating with these countries. And starting next year, we're going to do ODA business with them. And there's a KOPIA center in 22 countries around the world, and we provide tailored agricultural technology. When one center is formed, it stays there for 15 years because developing seed requires long-term commitment. So we're working with Agricultural Promotion Agency in those centers. And so you either you also create a seed and also plant the seed and then also add brand on top of it. And also, starting 2021, we worked with Ministry of Science and Technology to expedite R&D development. So when you look at R&D life cycle, when we work with developing countries and match them with Korean players, they were able to expedite the development cycle. So that's something very unique, I believe, to KIIP. And we started since 2010. And as you can see, there are about dozens of technology that is involved. I don't know whether you can see. So it's creating bee container and sugar cane planter, and also water planting greenhouse and oil extractor. And uraro is a kind of a potato-like crop, so that's used for food ingredients. So it's not only used in the Philippines, but also used in other countries as well. The company who participated in the Philippine project is now selling this approach and technology to other countries as well. And next is on brand. The graph is similar, as you can see. So like the optimal technology that we provided, or appropriate technology we provided, we also provide brand as well. So Korea is creating this certified brand. The Pungi Ginseng has a local brand in it. So we also attach Korean certification as well, and Vietnam wanted to do that. So we add Vietnam certification and add to the brand. And this was possible because the brand awareness of Korea was very high. And this page shows the economic impact. When we provided oil extractor, the income increased by 320%. In Mongolia, the extraction equipment was able to grow income as well as create export. So as you can see, although the money was not that big, the Korean companies were able to go into other markets as well. And also in Mongolia, we were able to also provide TPF device, which was to treat contaminated air. And we provided and is providing IP analysis. And we're also carrying out analysis along with Vietnam Research Institution. And this is a collaboration case where we can create and lower the emission. So this is a plan that we are looking into for the future. I mean, in Korea, we have different schools and different regulations. So our legal foundation is rather strong. One of the growth driver for Korea, I believe, is an IP. And teaching this to our children or the next generation, I believe, is meaningful. So that was the conclusion that we withdrew, and we want to disseminate that to overseas. And we're working with WIPO to do this as a new program. I think I used up so much time, but I think we will have an opportunity to have questions later on. Thank you for listening.
And next, I'd like to invite Mr. Park Yu-san from Korea Invention Promotion Association. We are going to hear about how to lead and promote international development aid for intellectual property in ASEAN. Good afternoon. As introduced, I am a researcher in charge of International Development Assistance Program at Korea Invention Promotion Association. So the topic I'm going to talk about today is international development and cooperation with ASEAN for intellectual property. The previous speaker talked about the ODA program in the area of IP, and now I want to talk about the ASEAN context. So based on our experiences in pursuing development cooperation with ASEAN in the IP utilization. So international development cooperation, typically it is to develop the economic growth of the recipient country. So that is basically the objective of this kind of program. Then the international development cooperation and intellectual property, when you combine these two words, what does that mean? So it is a cooperative process between countries that support partner countries to achieve socio-economic development based on intellectual property. So if the objective of the intellectual development cooperation is to pursue the socio-economic development of the recipient country, you can see that development and intellectual property are closely related. Intellectual property or patent, it can really increase a nation's productivity. For example, in Korea, when the patent application increased by 1%, the productivity can increase by 0.11% and GDP can increase by 0.11% within 3 to 5 years later. And also the impact of IP-intensive industries on the Korean economy shows that the contribution of IP to unemployment in Korea is 29.1%, wage premium is 51.1%, and GDP is 43.1%. So IP and utilizing IP in development cooperation can be a very effective way to pursue the socio-economic development of the recipient country. And also, this is not because the economy structure is based on physical property. This is more about intangible intellectual property, for example, IP rights and other intangible rights. And intangible assets are becoming important in nowadays in current economy, and also due to COVID-19, the people are now more dependent on the internet and technology, and there is a more discussion on IP. Intellectual property and intangible assets overall are becoming more important. So intellectual property are really the most important asset that companies can possess, and ensuring quality IP can ensure the survivability and competitiveness of a nation. Then what about the international development cooperation? And Korea, in order to provide a differentiated development aid, we can really refer to our own past history of national development and transfer that experience and knowledge to the recipient country. After the Korean War, Korea achieved a really fast economic development and technology development as well. So this success story made Korea as one of the top 5 IP countries in the world. So if you can share our success journey, then it can really differentiate our Korea's development cooperation program. So in the same context, I want to talk about ODA programs with intellectual property as well. Now I want to talk about intellectual property policy consultation. So what about policy consultation in the IP area? So basically, we provide a policy consultation with a particular focus on intellectual property. With this, our partner country, they can improve their own IP policy environment, and they can come up with a better better IP policy. So for example, intellectual property framework, a mechanism, and capacity building, these are the focus areas for policy consultation. So I want to talk about the topics that we covered so far in the policy consultation. For example, basically this is about building an infrastructure for IP. So if you look at the table here, the IP infrastructure, you can see some local infrastructure here. So it means domestic infrastructure of the recipient country, culture, governance, players, platform, so pipeline. So these are 5 core elements of domestic IP infrastructure. And there are some core elements of each area as well. So based on my experiences of policy consultation, I want to share some examples. So here, culture side, on the culture side, IP awareness or fair society. So this is for Vietnam. So the theme was how to crack down on counterfeit products and how to prevent the sales and distribution of counterfeit products within Vietnam. So the focus was on fair society and IP protection. And second, governance area, it was done with Iran. And we helped to build a stronger IP infrastructure, for example, laws and policies and entity defining force. Which government agency or department needs to conduct IP-related development cooperation programs. So this is under the Ministry of Justice in Iran. And so under the Ministry of Justice in Iran, there was a dedicated department for IP, and whether that is actually a good way to promote IP protection and infrastructure in Iran. And another program in Mongolia, this is about developing human resources. So this is to develop human resources who can work in the IP sector. So this is a player area. And IT service professionals, for example, patent or service professionals. So we want to grow human resources in this area. Again, this is in the area of a player. And also, I want to put focus on ASEAN programs. So ASEAN programs encompass all these 5 areas, law and master plan in the governance area, IP examiners in the player area, and also examining body, and for the pipeline, duration for IP examination. So, and other elements as well are connected for our policy consultation. So today's audience, you might be wondering about the IP infrastructure in ASEAN, and you might be curious about how policy consultation is conducted with ASEAN. So I want to give you a big picture explanation. So if you look at this table, there is an IP infrastructure. There are some specific indicators. So based on these indicators, the topics for policy consultation are determined. More specifically, I want to talk about ASEAN programs. So the first step in providing policy consultation is just like any other development cooperation program, is to identify the need of the recipient country. So if the agency organization is clear in the recipient country, things become much easier. But this requires a close consultation with the recipient country. And also, in many developing countries, it's not clear what kind of policy consultation is needed by our partner organization. So, and also based on our experiences in ASEAN, the first thing we did was to, there are 10 member countries in ASEAN. So we want to look at their overarching policy objective pursued by ASEAN as a whole. So they have 4 parts. There are 4 parts of their policy objectives. IPR action plan. So they have a 5-year plan announced. So one of the plan was to strengthen the role of intellectual property office and to build a stronger IP system in ASEAN. So we are not talking about country level. We are talking about the regional level. So in ASEAN, they want to build an integrated regional IP infrastructure. And the second, IP platform infrastructure. And third, a broad and comprehensive IP ecosystem in ASEAN. And next, strengthening local mechanism for homegrown intellectual property. So as we were carrying out ASEAN programs, we tried to look at the overall action plan as pursued by ASEAN and their overall objectives. And also, we looked at the consultation body, AWGPIS, the consultation body between ASEAN Secretariat and the member countries. So we looked at their priority areas and regarding in which area we are going to provide policy consultation, we had a close discussion with ASEAN. So that is how we decided on the 4 areas for policy consultation. 1, law and policy. So as I mentioned earlier about the infrastructure, governance is a part of this. And second, education. So education is under the scope of culture, so IT, fair society. And third, business policy. So IPR action plan has specified some asset creation. So, and also to support this business, some specific programs. So we looked at the IPR action plan by ASEAN. We looked at their specific objectives. So we tried to make our policy consultation in line with the overall ASEAN regional goal. But there are some challenges. For example, in terms of the bilateral cooperation program, we don't have this kind of challenges often. But with ASEAN, we are dealing with a regional framework with the 10 member countries. So there are some gaps even among the member countries. So there are many hurdles to overcome. For example, each member country has a different situation in terms of the level of socioeconomic development and also different gap in terms of the level of IT infrastructure. And despite such gaps among member countries, ASEAN as a whole, they really want to pursue co-prosperity. So as we were working with ASEAN, all member countries should benefit from the same program that we offer them. So that's one challenge as a donor country. And also, we need to think about harmonization. So we need to come up with a policy consultation that can make a contribution to a harmonious development in ASEAN as a whole. So, in the area of the law and governance, so there were really, we analyzed in details the IP-related laws and regulations of each ASEAN member country. So we produced this table. So it looks at the IP status and also the form of the patent examination and the overall patent application process as well. So for example, for this examination, what are the basic laws and regulations as a basis to examine patent application? So we did this kind of analysis, comparative analysis for all 10 member countries. And also, sometimes a country can ask other country to examine an IP patent, and also we looked at how the examination is done for the patent application, and we also looked at how patents are interpreted in these countries. So when a patent is filed in ASEAN, there are some language difference. For example, wording differences among 10 member countries. Some countries allow English. Some countries have other language. So there's a language difference. So So for example, when patent applicant applies for a patent, how they can overcome the language barrier. So we looked at that. So we thought about how to harmonize language in terms of patent filing. So this was one area we worked on as well. And on this slide, this is about the number of examiners per member country. So per member country's patent office. So it shows you the number of examiners, and it shows you the number of patent applications and backlog, meaning how long the patent application is delayed before it's granted. And so we looked at this, and also we actually went to visit the patent office in member countries, and so we tried to really get an accurate picture of the patent status in member countries. So overall, we looked at this to provide policy consultation to integrate their patent system at the ASEAN level. In 2015, ASEAN was formed, and they're now trying to integrate the IP system of all 10 member countries. Europe already has an integrated IP system. So the system integration has pros and cons. So integration has its own pros, and also the keeping your own national IP system, it also has its own benefit as well. So we did analysis for that, comparative analysis as well. Second, in the education area, this is actually connected to the hurdles that I mentioned earlier. Education level is also very different among member countries. So we divided it into 3 categories, for example. So one, early stage. So member country with a low level of education infrastructure, and a country with a more mature level of education infrastructure. So depending on the member country's level of education infrastructure, we also provide a differentiated consultation for education. And also, so the patent office in 10 member countries, we conducted a survey on them. So we asked the patent office workers what to focus on improving the IP infrastructure in ASEAN. So based on the survey results, we wanted to provide policy consultation really tailored to the actual needs and requirements of the member state, rather than being driven by our supplier. So to that end, we conducted interviews. So we really wanted to tailor our consultation to meet their actual needs. And second, I want to talk about business. So what about business or business development based on IP? So in this area, it's difficult to equally benefit all member countries because some countries, for example, Myanmar, they have very low level of IP infrastructure or IP development. So it's not easy for such a country to benefit a lot from building a business based on IP. Still, depending on the country's situation, we provide a consultation on how to build a business or how to have a commercial application of intellectual property right. And next, I want to talk about our tasks as development cooperation agency in the area of a policy consultation. So basically, the consultation that we provide, it needs to make a positive change, positive impact on the recipient country's policy development. So sometimes it comes down to the situation of the recipient country's government. So just a one-off consultation will not immediately lead to a better improvement of the IP infrastructure or framework of the recipient country. So this requires a continuous effort, and particularly the recipient country. We really need to help them to incorporate the consultation into their policy, and sometimes this requires financial support. And in many cases, these countries tend to be used to receiving financial support from more advanced countries or international organizations. So sometimes they don't have the luxury of dedicating their financial resources to building the IP infrastructure. So after providing our consulting services to ensure that the policy, our consultation will be incorporated into their policy, we also need to provide a follow-up financial support. So regarding, for example, this was a case of providing a policy consultation for their legal framework for IP. So we worked with the Philippines, and also regarding the human resource development case. And later, we had some education programs for educators in the Philippines. And also, so let's say that we provided policy support, policy consultation to 10 member countries. But in order for this consultation to actually translate into their policy capacity, sometimes KIIP needs to step in and provide capacity building education programs to the people of the recipient countries' agencies. And also, sometimes we need to develop education materials for them because they don't have the capacity to come up with their own education materials. So we are developing education materials as well. Next, financing. We work with other AP countries as well to provide the financing, because ASEAN countries, they're part of the APEC as well. So we don't want our policy consultation to end as just policy consultation. We want those consultation items to be really incorporated, developed into their actual policy. So to support continuous support, we want to work with them on an ongoing basis as well. And this is a history of Korean economy and IP, and we developed this slide because when we provide consultation to the member states of ASEAN, we want to show you how we don't provide the current level of Korea's education. So we first look at the actual situation of the member state of ASEAN, the recipient country, and we try to identify the corresponding time period in the Korean history. So refer back to our own experience and share that with them depending on their situation. So because Korea, as of 2019, Korea's economic development level and IP infrastructure is much more advanced than ASEAN member countries. So depending on the member countries' need, ASEAN countries' need, we look at what kind of IP owners might be a good match for member ASEAN countries. For example, SMEs. Then we analyze the IP history and IP analysis of a given time period of Korean experience, and then share that with the ASEAN country. So I've been talking about how we develop a policy consultation in IP area with ASEAN countries, and also talked about the follow-up work as well. So if you have any questions, maybe I can take your questions after the next presentation. Thank you very much.
Lastly, we would like to invite Dr. Jessica Choi from KIIP to hear about the International Development Corporation and recommendation around International Development Corporation for IP. Good afternoon. As introduced, my name is Jessica Choi from KIIP. I would like to talk about the recommendation on IP International Development Cooperation. I will be presenting, but the content was jointly developed by Professor Taemi Jang and Eugene Han from Sookmyung University, as well as KIIP as well. So we're going to look into the ODA and International Development Cooperation in areas of intellectual property and direction, and then end with some implication and recommendation. And based on what has been written by Professor Han and Dr. Jang, I'm going to present this. Just to introduce myself, I majored in engineering and I finished JD, and I started working in KIIP since 2009, and before that I worked in semiconductor area as well as I was a visiting researcher in Japan. So I'll be talking in light of technology and also IP as well. As you know, this is the background and context of why we're having this discussion. Just to mention a few contexts, when you look at overseas market, we need to further enhance protection of our intellectual property of our companies. US and China started fierce competition, and there has been a conflict between the two countries, and the property or intellectual property related system and regulation is well advanced in other advanced countries, but also it is important for emerging countries to have the right regulations and system in place. Korea has export-led industrial structure. So when you look at our trading volume, relative to our trading volume, our overseas patent filing is limited, especially for small and medium-sized companies. So we are fully aware of the situation. Despite this being the fact, we need to look into the characteristics of the emerging market to come up with a systematic strategy for IP to differentiate ourselves. When you look at key international countries, global countries, they're increasing international development cooperation. When you look at Japan and China, who are our neighboring countries, China is enhancing their voice in IP, in setting IP framework and regulation through their One Belt, One Road initiatives, and they're also expanding their soft power. As a result, in South Africa, the Itzkowicz Family Foundation released a survey result for African youth in 2022, and it seems that China has the strongest influence in China at 77%, and Japan is also providing support in Africa to support IP-related area as they have done in Asia Pacific. So there is a need for Korea to expand our international cooperation in IP area as well. So with that in mind, when it comes to international development cooperation, I want to focus my talk on intellectual property and property rights. Although we are skewed a little bit toward industrial property rights, but if there's an opportunity to talk about this, we can also talk further about contents as well as ODA as well. But since this session is covering overall intellectual property, then we'll look at the overall IP as well as the concept of ODA as well. So just to cover the area of IP and ODA, what International Development Cooperation is to have cooperation who are relatively less developed in terms of economy and society. And among that, the key objective of development cooperation is to contribute to economic and social development and welfare of recipient countries. But also, there are different goals of the donor countries. There are humanitarian reason, political, diplomatic, and development agenda, and commercial agenda. So ODA is about increasing or enhancing economic development and welfare for a country's central or local government and public institutions, and providing a flow of capital to international organizations or developing countries. So leveraging IP or transferring IP could be also an area of cooperation for IP ODA. And the scope would be patent, copyright, design, goodwill, right, and industrial property rights, database and database rights. And with the Data Basic Act, the data itself could be included as the scope of IP. So when you look at the scope of intellectual property, the scope is ever expanding. Then what would be the direction for IP, International Development Cooperation? There could be various directions that we can talk about, but we can think about somewhat phased strategy or stage-by-stage strategy for international cooperation. As the first stepping stone or first phase, creating contents to enhance awareness could be one starting point. And there could be three areas that we can think about in developing this content. Basically, we can leverage existing contents to translate that into a recipient country. So that could be the starting point. And also updating and refining already development contents could be the second area. And also, aside from existing content, we can develop more tailored new content. And as KIIP speaker mentioned, they have a lot of contents at Korea Invention Promotion Association. So in addition to that, we can also update and develop new content. So that could be also an idea for phased strategy. Also, as a basic or starting point, we can enhance the standard of living. And in the standard of living, what we can do is by leveraging Korea's IPs to improve the quality of life of the developing countries to create economic value. Until now, we were focused on appropriate technology, but that area of scope could expand to patent and copyright as well, and design. And when it comes to copyright and design, we can also expand the usage of these property for developing countries. And next is intermediate stage.
So at the intermediate stage, the focus is on educating examiners of patent application. But apart from that, we also develop other assistance as well. So here we are talking about fast-growing recipient country. So typically fast-growing developing countries, they have an increasing number of trademark-related applications. So we want to help them to process that, and also regarding right violation, sometimes you need to enforce the right. So we provide relevant institutions, legal institutions we have in Korea. So basically, this is education. And next, again, intermediate level. This is about intellectual property rights acquisition and utilization. So to develop the economy of the recipient country, the recipient country needs to constantly make efforts to develop their research and research level, their technology level. So as they develop their technology, they also need to know how to protect their rights, and this is really important for them to compete against multinational companies as well. So here we kind of target universities or companies in the recipient country. So we teach them the importance of the patent rights and how to apply for a patent and how to utilize their patent rights. And next is advanced level. So basically this is about utilizing the IP related data. Korea, we have a successful IP information system. So we also export our IP information system. So for example, we exported our IP information system to Mongolia in 2021, to Azerbaijan in 2013, and to UAE in 2017. So we can, based on our own experiences of building database on patent information, we can help other countries to build a similar system, for example, for trademark or design application. As developing countries just see an increasing case of design application. 6, this is again advanced level, IP infrastructure, IP institution, laws and regulations, and policy consultation. IP encompass the patent rights, trade rights, design rights, and copyrights as well. So here, the IP and also IP related policies are really dispersed among many government bodies. So in Korea, for example, we have the Presidential Council on Intellectual Property to deal with the intellectual property issues, pan-government. So we can help the recipient countries to build a similar control tower for managing their nation's intellectual property. So we provide policy consultation in that regard. And also, for example, intellectual property examination or judgment and intellectual property policy development, all these require consultation as well from a more advanced country. So we help them in this regard as well. Now I want to talk about propagating Korean-style administration of intellectual property. So again, we need to look at the maturity level of the recipient country in terms of their IP infrastructure and institutions. And again, for various reasons, IP development cooperation program, it can be multifaceted, and we want to expand our program in this area. So if we can do that, then ultimately it can help to export our IP related administration system. But of course, we want to consider the particular situations of each recipient countries. So with this, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. So we are going to have a panel discussion right away.
We have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one common question and carry on with our discussion. All of you here on the stage are carrying out and playing a leading role in ODA-related international cooperation. So I think this will be a good opportunity to talk about your personal experience. So my question is the following. Regarding ODA and regarding your international development cooperation work, what was the most challenging thing for you? So among these challenges, if you were to solve these issues, or do you believe that, or is there an area where we can further promote certain areas? Please share that with us. So who would like to go first? So we'll just follow the presentation order. I will try not to spend so much time. So actually, I'm carrying out ODA work in KIIP, so this could be somewhat trivial, but I have about three challenges that I face. First is one that is coming from the government. It's a structural problem, so there is limited time and budget. So I said it's a single-year project. And if it's a single-year project, as you can see, government budget is provided on an annual basis. So when we receive this budget in January, we have to spend it by December. And we have to recruit a service provider during this year. But bidding takes time. And with that bidding lead time in mind, the actual program or project can be carried out only for 8 months or even less than 8 months. So solving an issue in a developing country within 8-month time frame is not going to be easy. Even if it's a multi-year budget, when you go through the budget execution in the following year, we go through the same process again. So the participants and service providers do not necessarily participate again. So we feel some fatigue in the process. There are some waste in time. Of course, we understand that this is inevitable, but definitely something that we want to try to improve in the future. Second, output. We only have short-sighted view on the output. Not just Korean citizens or Korean people, but it's same for the government organization. So if you carry out a program starting in May following year, they want to understand economic impact, how much employment or job creation took place. That kind of question is being asked. Everything cannot be measured quantitatively. So if we can have a long-term view, it would be great. That's something to improve. Third is a delayed answer coming from the recipient country. Korea, I mean, in every aspect, a lot of the things are carried out rather quickly in Korea, but the response is rather late. As you can see, we have short window of time to implement programs. So if we ask that question, the response is very late. So if we can expedite that, that would be great. So these are some three challenges I would like to mention. So we talked about the budget execution time frame and the short-term outcome that is requested and the response from the recipient countries. And also, Yusan, anything from you?
Well, additionally, the International Development Cooperation Program, it began as a humanitarian effort. So, and also because Korea, we used to be a recipient country, but now we are a donor country. So from the humanitarian perspective, we want to help other countries. So we often call the recipient country as a partner country. But as Mr. Che mentioned earlier, we also need to think about the national objective of the recipient country and what kind of actual benefit our program can bring to them. So we need to think about the humanitarian aspect and economic value. Sometimes it's not easy to connect the two. So for example, the goal of an international development cooperation program in a way is kind of has an inherent challenge to pursue the seemingly opposite values. And because I'm involved in the consultation business, so I really want to make sure that the consultation we provide can be incorporated into the recipient country's policy, but that's not within our control. It's really up to the political will people of the recipient country and also the system and the institution of the recipient country. So even though we provide consultation, sometimes it does not translate into the actual policy or legal framework institution of the recipient country. So it can be frustrating as a participant in the program. And also, as we develop programs and develop financial resources and propose the ideas and pursue those programs with ministries, various ministries, it is not easy to find a stable source of financing. That's another challenge. And sometimes and we need to start developing or planning the program 2 years prior. So this requires a long-term planning. Again, this needs administrative support. And also we need to build an actual business with this program, and also, for example, to win some government budget or financial support from whatever source. We need to put together proposals and presentations. So these are really important aspects of our program implementation.
So for ODA, what you're saying is that you need a long-term plan, and although this being a long-term plan, that is not being reflected in the overall implementation. Dr. Che, anything you want to add? Yes, please, I will go ahead. I don't know whether my microphone is working. I think it's working. As Ms. Che mentioned, the issue of budget and resource input is, I think, the issue that I'm going to talk about. But then let me just approach from a different angle. I'm not going to mention the name of the country, but when you look at the laws and regulation in Korea, for this country, there is this law and regulation on patent lawyer, and we provided consulting for patent lawyers requirement and regulations for that countries. There could be different level of depth. So we can translate the law on patent lawyer into that recipient country's language. Or furthermore, what we can do is we can also introduce our patent lawyers' work or scope of work and consult that and advise that to the recipient countries. In addition to that, although it's a patent law or patent lawyers regulation, there is also a civil law that is being applied. So when you look at our Korean civil law, there is law behind legal entity, and regulation around legal entity could be applied. And also lawsuit around civil law and criminal law could be all interlinked. So providing consulting on IP in relations and in linkage with different law framework could be one area of consulting. One country that I worked with had very good reception. So advising and consulting a legal framework or law is something that you have to really think hard on. But this country was very receptive of that consulting. What we can do is, because time and budget is limited, what we can do is we can go in depth. So with limited resource and with some limitation, we can go deeper. But we cannot just do this for one country, right? So because of limited resource, how far or how deep can we go? And inevitably, we had some limitation there, something that we would like to improve. Okay? All in all, you talked about the characteristics of ODA and the implementation and performance and consequence management was challenging, so I was able to see that.
I have an additional question. So as we run ODA programs, we are now targeting many ASEAN countries. What about countries other than ASEAN countries? Other countries you have in mind, other than ASEAN, with any ideas about specific ODA programs that you have in mind for non-ASEAN countries? So let me ask you in the reverse order. So there are already many ODA programs that are going on, but given the limited resources, it's difficult to avoid being concentrated in certain region. But still, if I'm to select a region that might benefit from our cooperation, Africa, and next year, so I cannot give you all the plans or details of the plan that we are thinking about, but we want to invite some African countries to talk about the importance of IP. And my organization is a research institute, so we want to host a seminar or forum to talk about the importance of IP with experts. So that is kind of one program that I have in mind.
As for me, toward ASEAN countries, we are providing consulting to ASEAN countries for past years. And we also have Middle Eastern project as well. As for Middle East, it's not a developing country. So we also have budget coming from Middle Eastern countries as well. So based on UA business program, we are now doing Saudi Arabian program. But then this also involves the visibility of cooperation and protecting our company. Also some other consideration to look into. So there are various areas that we have to review, and what we focus on is ASEAN countries and Middle Eastern countries.
I talked about the overall ODA program at KIPO, and there are some hurdles that we need to overcome. So basically, as Mr. Park mentioned, some companies that we are focusing on the countries that the government wants to put focus on. But still, if we are free to select other countries, then we still try to juggle what are the right priorities. And also we already have some countries to prioritize as per the national plan, still ASEAN countries. So our focus still on ASEAN.
Thank you for that comment. Do you have any question from the floor? I think we'll have time to accommodate one question, and with that we will wrap up our session. Any question from the floor? Yes, we have one question. Please hand over the microphone. Good afternoon. Thanks to today's session, I was able to learn about development cooperation area for IP. I have a question for... Bear with me, I'm sorry. I have a question to Yusan Park from Korea Invention Promotion Association. The reason I am here today is because I major in Iranian language. And I know that there is development cooperation in Iran. And I want to further learn about development cooperation there. And after that development project, was there any follow-up program? After this development cooperation was finished, If there is nothing, is it because there's no demand from the recipient country, or is it because of change in policy direction? So what would be the reason why there is no follow-up cooperation project? Thank you for that question. Iran's IP strengthening program was carried out in 2017 to 2018. It was tailored to Iran's situation to look into GI and patent map and different technology. So there was a huge demand, but we carried out consulting projects selectively. Iran has very similar characteristic when it comes to the national people. It was my first project country for Persian region, but we were able to build very good rapport with the participants. But we also developed the second program, but then the second program was carried out by KIIP, not KIIP. So the second KSP project was carried out by KIIP. And after that, because of the geopolitical reason, it was very difficult to continue on with the project. And on your question about demand, and Iran sends us email every year. They ask for programs for industrial property right, IP, especially. There are also requests on consulting for a broadcasting area as well. So there are extensive demand, but because of the geopolitical situation, we are unable to develop consulting program for Iran. Thank you for that question.
Any additional question from the audience? No? Okay. So if there's no further question, we'd like to wrap up the panel discussion. So let me just wrap up seated here. So with this, we'd like to conclude the status direction of intellectual development cooperation in intellectual property. Thank you for your participation. Thank you.